There are two more spots right in here. Do you already have spots? Okay. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. This is traditionally an evening at Beth Shalom that is not only for our Jewish members, but for the broader Bozeman community. It is Yom HaShoah, and behind the seemingly random date every year is an actual Hebrew calendar that marks this day today with the 27th of the month of Nisan. That means it is exactly 1 week after the end of the festival of Passover. 2 weeks after we gathered here in this very room to celebrate the Passover Seder. It was placed there deliberately to send a message. The message of how close liberation and destruction can be. In the history of the Jewish people, that has proven to be true over and over again. But this year, I think these two dates, these two marks on the Jewish calendar and their proximity have an almost universal message. There are many liberties, and maybe those we take most for granted are the ones who can become fragile from one day to another. And also, there is a message of hope. In the middle of the greatest destruction, we have learned liberation, freedom will come again. It is an honor tonight to share this bima, as we call it, to share this place of teaching with two exceptionally gifted artists. Our first one is the violinist Valerie Weber, who is bringing to us her own remaking of an original Jewish contemporary composition by Gerald Cohen of Psalm 23, a psalm that is sung every time Jews commemorate the ones we lost, a song that is recited especially today by the Jewish community globally. And then also by artist Willem Molkers, who joins us here, and I realized for the second time in the history of Beth Shalom, and I wasn't aware of that when we were connected for the first time, thanks to Connie Ostrovsky and her wonderful connections here in our little town, who brings his own life story, his own reflections, and his incredible, remarkable, I think, unparalleled way to have a view of history, of his personal experiences, and of the universal human aspects of that chapter of Jewish history that has unfolded in his own personal life. I want to invite you to lean back for a couple of minutes to just take in the music so beautifully arranged by our community member, Valerie Weber. And then I'm going to hand over the microphone to Willem. Willem, I cannot tell you how grateful we are that you joined us here today. One last thing I want to share, and if you're Jewish, you're allowed to laugh. And if you're not Jewish, you're allowed to. Before I became the rabbi here, someone forwarded me an email saying, I have to step back from my membership to Beth Shalom. A female rabbi belongs on the bima like a ham sandwich on a Seder plate. I don't know this woman. I'm not personally offended at all. But this year for the Seder, we put slices of bread next to everything. They were made out of wood, so it was actually perfectly kosher. There were 18 of them, right? 19? 18 of them. 18 is a beautiful Jewish number. 18 means chai. It means life. The number of slices of bread that Willem was able to eat finally after the end of the Second World War when they were delivered by the Dutch army? No, I forgot. By the Canadians, right. The Canadian gives, the Canadian takes. Well, there's that. That is your joke to tell. It was an amazing, wonderful experience to have these slices piled up next to me, one of the many, many pieces of art that Willem has gifted this community. Thank you. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Willem Balkers, artist, immigrant, survivor, deep thinker, greatest gift to this community.
Thank you so much for inviting my wife and me to this special evening. For me, Holocaust Remembrance Day means thinking about, if I can do this without tears, 183 children from my school who died in the Holocaust. And so my whole talk is about my response as an artist and as a human being to those events. I was born in 1939, and that's my birth announcement, actually. And my father worked, as we'll see in a minute, worked for a major wholesale paper merchant. And he had access to a lot of graphic designers. So he had a well-known Dutch designer do that announcement with an actual pin, safety pin. And the pun involved is on the second line, you see the tentoonstelling Kleurenpracht. And that is a reference to a Depression-era project that my father worked with in a large park in Amsterdam to put people to work, and they planted flowers. And so the pun is the color. Of course, there's some color in the diaper there, as you can see. So that was pretty creative. My father was not an artist, but he was very creative. And there I am as a crossing guard in about 1948, about 10 years later. Let's see. No, that went backwards. Okay, let's see. Okay, we'll go. My parents in about 1951 with my youngest brother, Volkert Volkers, who became a singer-songwriter, who lives up in New Hampshire. And on the right is a poster advertising my dad's company. My father, for a while, was head of advertising and marketing for the company. It was a pretty large company. It had about 800 employees. And I think he had a hand in creating that poster as well. Liberation Day, May 5th, 1945. On the left is my family and our neighbors, and on the right is my brother Evert with the Dutch flag. My creative career sort of started with that coloring book. It came out right after World War II, and somebody did some research. There's only a few copies of this even available in the Dutch libraries. I did a sculpture based on an image in that coloring book. The title is Kinderen en Canadezen, which means children and Canadians, and we were, as I mentioned a while back, we were liberated by the Canadians. Little story about this sculpture here. This little girl is saluting or waving at a Canadian soldier. It's a little hard to see in this light, but in his left hand is a little tube with a cigarette in it. And when the Canadians came down our street, they were handing out cigarettes to the adults and candy to the kids. And so, of course, I asked for a cigarette. And he gave me one, but he made me promise that I would give it to my dad. My dad saved it, and when I turned 18, my dad still had it and gave it to me. So when I did this sculpture as a tribute to that whole era, I put that cigarette in there, in the same tube that my dad had kept it in. And this traveled on a show in Canada, and I got a call one day from the Lethbridge Library, somebody stole the cigarette. And so I thought, well, the Canadians giveth and the Canadians taketh away, you know. My wife made the little Dutch flag. Here's a little sculpture that Rabbi was referring to. At the end of the war, the Swedish Air Force did food drops, and that parachuted down into the fields. And so we had fresh bread after what the Dutch refer to as the hunger winter. In winter 44, 45, the Dutch railway workers went on strike to keep ammunitions and etc. From reaching their destination. And so we survived eating, among other things, tulip bulbs. I had a great uncle who was the director of a um, agricultural college. And he had access to tulip bulbs, of course. And so he was able to get tulip bulbs to my dad. And they apparently are poisonous unless you cook them. And so luckily they were cooked. And I still remember the kind of smells in the house that were just kind of sweet and still in my memory. It smells like that, bring back that era. Also in here, in this little sculpture, so this is a child's chair that I made and a little floor, and there's slices of bread, and there's my dog tags. And so I started school in February of 1944, and we walked to school. And I just reread some of my dad's notes about the war. He wrote a pretty major compendium of memories of the war called My Life Story, and I gave a copy of it to the U.S. Holocaust Museum. But among other things, he talked about how we walked on wooden shoes. There was no leather available, so we walked in wooden shoes. And we walked to school, and we had to have a dog tag in case somebody would get hurt. This is my family just before we emigrated. My father was very smart in that he hired this well-known Dutch photographer to photograph our household. We were in our Boy Scout and Girl Scout uniforms. There's photographs of me in my room. I built radios when I was a kid, and so with all my equipment, and we all played instruments. So there's photographs of that. So it's a really great volume to have. And so there's my mother, sister Nani, sister Micah, me, sister Elska, my dad, and my brother Evert. My mother at that point is pregnant with number 6, Volkert. There's a sculpture I did of my dad, and of course my memories of him are, he was kind of larger than life. He came to the U.S. by himself in 1951, and he flew to New York because he had some business connections there. But he decided that was not a great place to raise a family. He got a job in Houston with a Dutch publisher, and long story short, ended up in Seattle and said, now it's time for the rest of the family to come. And that was in 1953. So he spent 2 years and left the move to my mother. The crate of what we moved to this country was so big that it came with instructions of how to build a carport. So we built a carport out of it, which Diane and I used to drive through the alley whenever we revisited Seattle, and finally a few years ago it was gone. So it lasted quite a while. And this is a little sculpture. It's called A Boy Visits New York, which actually I recently sold to the curator of the Paris Gibson Square Museum of Art in Great Falls. So it's found a good home. So in 2006, I got an email from this man, Ronald Saunders, who was then still teaching at my elementary school, and he was doing research on the impact that the war had on our school, both the building, the students, and the faculty. And in that process, he discovered that at that point, that 172 kids from my school, or both students and former students, had perished in concentration camps. He published a book about the school, and as part of that, his discovery was of all the names of all the victims. And so there's pages and pages with names and dates and how old, their age, and the camps that they died in. So you see Sobibor and Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen are the most frequent ones that crop up. And then their age, I mean, you look at that, 7 years old, 10 years old, 13 years old. The older ones are the ones that had attended the school when the school was first founded in 1927. my first response was this sculpture, Slaughter of the Innocents, in which I have a tank. It's a diptych, a two-panel sculpture, facing these birds, which are stand-ins for the children. Then it came to me to construct a suitcase for each child. And so they're under construction. It took me 7 months in the studio every day to build the 172 suitcases. And on each, as I said, I painted the name and the date of death. Both the Dutch and the Germans are very good record keepers, so he really had very precise kind of records. If they didn't know the precise date, but they knew the month, they used the last day of the month to designate the date of death. I also thought that I work with neon, that's one, and they needed to be accompanied by a child, I thought. So I created this child that I called Leo. And there's my old friend who is no longer with us, Bill Todd, who bent my neon for the first 25 years that I was in Kansas City. He used to run Rainbow Signs, if you remember, on 8th and can't remember the side street, not across the street. Here's the pattern for it. There he's actually, the neon comes in straight sticks or tubes that are heated. And so he needs a pattern, and then he heats up a small section, and there's a bend, and then continues to do that until he's got the complete form. And then he splices on the electrodes at the end and fills it with gas. There's a little vent for the gas to be entered into the tube, and then it's sealed tight so that the gas stays sealed in the tube. Okay, I'll get to that in a minute. Oops, I'm going. So this is early. This is in 2009 when I was building the suitcases. And this is the first show. And it was at the Exit Gallery, a student-run gallery on campus here at MSU. I asked, in each venue, I've always asked volunteers to install the suitcases, which means that they're handling them, they're confronting the information on the suitcase, and so there are 2 student volunteers installing the suitcases. This is at Bozeman High School. Bozeman High School is lucky enough to actually have a gallery, as some of you know. And so there's a group of students installing suitcases, and they treat it very differently. You see them much more randomly stacked. And it was a real eye-opener for me that each installation was very different from the last one and for the next one. And this was, I think, the first place where they actually opened up the suitcase, some of the suitcases. And I thought, oh, that's interesting, because it's sort of like, of course, you wonder with the suitcase, what's in the suitcase? And of course, I often get questions, why suitcases? Well, you get maybe half an hour at best, to pack your suitcase. And then you show up outside and the trucker's waiting and takes you to, the Dutch have a camp called Westerbork, where everybody went to and then transferred to concentration camps, other concentration camps. So that's Bozeman High School. And then I went to U of M. And the spaces are different, and the responses are different. And you get people. I remember a girl saying she picked up 2 suitcases, and she said, "Oh, they have the same name. Oh, they were born on the same day. Oh, they're twins." And they died in 2 different concentration camps. They separated them. This is the poster for that particular exhibition. And opening them up also revealed the insides of the suitcases. Our son was working for Montana, what is it called? Furniture Industries. And they had a huge dumpster, and it's amazing the scraps that went in there. So I would dive into the scraps, and I would fight with my graduate students because they also saw it as a great source of wood, you know, for projects. And so this is probably from an outer sheet of plywood that indicates the source, and I think it's birch plywood from the Baltic area, Baltic plywood. Another Montana installation was at the Thurman Larson Gallery in Helena, and the owner and an assistant did the installation. And I loved it because it was sort of all got stacked and piled into the back of the room. And I tried to find as many, the galleries that I found to show the work in, I tried to find the smallest kind of space. So it was kind of claustrophobic. So you walk in and you can't really back away. And you have to confront the work. And then I went to the Yellowstone Art Museum. An instructor from Montana State, what it was called, Billings, and her students installed this. And they did a big waving kind of wall. There's enough units. You can see them as modular units, really, in a way. And there were enough to build this really beautiful wall. So it was a beautiful installation. Then I heard or read online that the Dutch were building a Holocaust museum. And so I said, "Are you interested?" And they said, "Yes." And I said, "If you're interested, I'll just donate it to you." So I built 6 crates, and they were trucked to Salt Lake and flown to Amsterdam. And then my wife, Diane, and our son, Jason, and I flew out. And here we are in the gymnasium of my school. It's a Montessori school. And in my rusty Dutch, I am introducing the project to them. And then what we did the next day, students and former students and parents and a few friends walked the suitcases through the streets of Amsterdam with police escort. When they originally told me that they wanted to walk them to the museum, I remembered Amsterdam well enough that I knew that it was too long a walk for kids to do. So we walked maybe a mile or 2 and then got on a bus and drove close to the museum, and I got out of the bus and walked the rest of the way. Here we are on a very historic square. This is a square where 450 Dutch Jewish men were gathered together and sent to concentration camps. And so we had to visit that square on our walk, and we asked the kids to raise the suitcases. On the right, this is on that walk, and these 2 girls, I love that photo that I took, obviously close friends. And a slide that I took, or someone took of me, was used for years by a former student of mine who taught high school in Palm Springs. And so he sent me a slide of his students watching and hearing about this whole project. Here you see a young boy helping to install the suitcases. So again, I gave them, I said, it's your project, it's your job to install them. And what one teacher had done, she had asked the students to write notes to the victims. And I think this, okay, let's see, maybe we'll go. Yeah, there you go. And this one is pretty poignant, and I translated it for you. Dear Madeleine, You attended this school, me too. You walked here, me too. You laughed here, me too. So similar, so different, but one thing is certain, you were here, you are here, you will always be here. And there's Ronald Saunders kneeling and inspecting one of the suitcases. He was recently knighted by the king for the research he did about my school. He's a wonderful man. He's now writing a book about the school that Anne Frank attended, which was another Montessori school a mile or two from mine, the one that I attended. And then they asked me to place the last suitcase. And you can't see it in the slide, but the faces are really great. Look at the open mouth and a lot of smiles. It was great to be there, and some Holocaust survivors showed up, as did some of my family members and some friends, some school friends. It was quite a day. And that was their final installation. And then they decided, after they were going to keep the installation for like 3 months, and then they decided they wanted to keep a period and make it into a real teaching tool. And so in its new home, so this is Hollandse Schouwburg, which is basically translates as Dutch theater. They created it, which is across the street from the Holocaust Museum. And the theater is historically very important because it was a transit for families sent to concentration camps. And in this building, there was a nursery for children, and they found a way of handing those children over a wall, and they were saved, even though the parents, of course, perished. So there's a room now designated to these suitcases, and kids come from all over the country on trains and buses. They invite them in, and it's their introduction to the Holocaust and to keep that thing alive. Julia Sarbo is the education director. They have a slide, series of slides going that show me, among other things, working on the project. This is a more recent development. Ronald Saunders discovered 10 more names, and Connie Ostrovsky and her husband Jerry and Diane and I took those 10 suitcases that I made, and we used them as baggage on the airplane. So they weren't just shipped; they were. And I actually hand carried a suitcase. There was it's kind of a really touching kind of story. I think he was a 9-year-old boy who died in 1940 in Amsterdam, and I thought, well, not a concentration camp. 1940s, before most of those kids were sent to concentration camps. So I did some homework. The family committed suicide. So it's just, anyway, so we personally delivered the suitcases, and Connie and Jerry you can't see it in the slide too well. There's Jerry and there's Connie. Here's this, a school group that made a Star of David out of the suitcases. And at one point they printed these die cut in the shape of suitcases, a little folder where they had to complete questions about the child. So they could go to their little library, or they could go online and learn about the families and see photos of the children. And so now they have a different system, but they've adapted over the years and have changed things. But it's a real learning tool, as you can tell. Here are kids. There's information inside the suitcase. Here's a little workbook. There's a teacher or a parent with kids working on the project. And this is the most recent iteration. Some of you, as I know, saw the exhibit, the Anne Frank exhibit at the Bozeman Public Library this last month. What I find most touching is the little drawings on stickies that the kids did. This one says, "I'm sorry," and you see a body standing straight up and a body lying down, I assume. And one of them response was, "Dorothea, you died on my birthday." So it becomes really personalized. And so that was, you hear the numbers, the figures, of the millions who died. Very few of us, I mean, kind of new individuals. So I've given them names, and people can learn more about the stories. We based on Roland Sandler's research, we did little bios on the 9 suitcases that I made. So they're basically reproductions of the earlier suitcases, and a photo of the child. So you can open up the. So Connie did a great job in the sense that it invited kids and families into that little room, and again, it's a small room. You're confronted with it. You can handle the suitcase. You can open them. You can get information. Just a few other pieces that I did with the suitcases, and in the same kind of series. So I kept on building on that suitcase kind of idea as a metaphor. Ellen Ornitz, who is here with us tonight, was running the Jesse Wilbur Gallery at the Emerson, and invited me to have an exhibition there. And again, it was a really great space because I don't think that gallery is even as large as this room. Maybe it is similar, but pretty small. So once you're in there, you're right onto the work, right next to it, on top of it. That tall sculpture in the center is called Childhood Lost. And it's sort of like, what would a child take with him or her if they had half an hour to pack a suitcase? And I found kind of toy-like things. And the top suitcase was painted by one of our granddaughters, who is now a mother of 3. So this was done a few years ago. This comes apart in sections. And it's pretty tall. It's probably close to, not probably as tall as that wooden ceiling up there, wooden wall. Let's see. I did a few exhibitions that were based on war-themed and Holocaust themes, sculptures. This was Persistent Memories at the Yellowstone Art Museum. At the time, it was the most heavily attended exhibition in their history, because they brought in a lot of school kids. And I'll talk a little bit more about that piece in the center. Hard to talk about. As you know, they used the subterfuge of you're getting ready for a shower, as they arrived at the concentration camp. And so I tried to imagine what that might be like. And I built these benches and a wooden floor, as you might think of in a shower-like setting. And the benches are based on a bench that I built in a carpentry class in the late 40s. And the reason I know the date is because I found it in my dad's workshop after he died. And it was made out of old crates from his company. And somebody had scribbled in that it was made in February of 1949. And then I went around Bozeman and went to junk stores and got pairs of shoes. I'm in the process of trying to find homes for these sculptures. That tall Childhood Lost is now in the permanent collection of the Yellowstone Art Museum. and I'm in discussion with several museums around the country for the remainder of those sculptures. This one's called 9, and that one is called, I don't know what the title is, but it's this teetering stack of suitcases with a bird flying out like the spirit is flying off. This one I made entirely out of wooden shoes. So I got wooden shoes online and I sanded them all down because I wanted them to be real bare, and they're almost skin-like in their color. It's called Remains. Here's that tall childhood lost again. This is at the Missoula Art Museum. Here you can see a detail a little bit. One thing I may not have mentioned, oh yeah, I did. A lot of them are made out of recycled wood because our son was working for the furniture factory. So the surfaces look different, which makes them more unique, one from the other. There it is at the Yellowstone Art Museum. And there's a piece in the background by Debbie Butterfield and John Buck. And this is, I think, one of the last images lost and found. This, in my teens, I did a lot of wandering, and I went back to Europe, and one time I was gone for 3 years, and the year I graduated from high school, I spent a whole year in Europe, and I somehow managed to get into East Berlin. I wanted to explore that, and while West Germany and Holland were rebuilding their economies as well as physically, the architectural structures were getting rebuilt, there were still women with gunny sacks picking up bricks from buildings that had been bombed. And I took some photos until they were taking photos of me. In other words, the secret police caught on to me and saw me taking photos, so I made it back into West Berlin pretty quickly. But this is sort of like an image of what it might have been like, not only for the architecture to be destroyed, but for lives to be destroyed. The end. That's the 172, the first 172 that I constructed, and the number is now 183 is the total. And Roland Sanders continues to do research and write books about the school and about the Holocaust. So my hat is really off to him for all that work that he's done. That's it. Any of you have any questions or comments?
Yes, I have a microphone here and wanted to ask, would you raise your hand for questions or comments to Willem Balkers?
Well, thank you for your presentation and your work, really awesome.
Thank you.
So my question is that, do you have records of what the children wrote and did when you took the exhibit to the school?
Records of?
Of what the children did, what the children said, what the children did when they were exposed to your suitcases.
Oh, let me think. My first answer is probably not. Let's see. How would you answer that, Diane? Okay. Yeah.
Arranging them, yeah. You took slides and took
Yeah.
photos, and you documented some of the things that they wrote that were put in the suitcases at the Holocaust Museum.
Yeah.
So that much.
But yeah, but not as complete as you would think or would like probably. But so it's very partial, yeah, documentation of that. Yeah.
This was so moving. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Has any filmmaker approached you about turning your work into a documentary of some sort?
That's an interesting question, and it leads to an interesting story. After the show was up at the Yellowstone Art Museum, I got a call from a woman, and she said, my husband and I, we're from Winnipeg. We were driving in the Billings area, bad storm, blowing off the road. Thought we'd better spend the night, and then thought, well, what are we going to do while we're here? Let's go to the art museum. And Carol is a woman's name. Her husband is a poet. She's a writer, and she had written the book that accompanies an exhibition at the National Holocaust Museum called Daniel's Story. I don't know if any of you have seen that or heard that, but when you go in the downstairs in the Holocaust Museum in D.C., there's an exhibit called, primarily oriented towards younger people, called Daniel's Story. And she had written the story for that, a book. And so she said, can we meet you? So they drove to Bozeman, and we met, and we became friends. And we've always kept up contact. And a couple of years ago, she said, I'd like to work with my agent to submit an idea of writing a story about you or your family. And that's still very much in progress. So I wrote some excerpts about experiences. And so I don't know where that's going. But that's not a filmmaker, but a writer. Yeah. So stay tuned. Yeah.
I thought it was fascinating that you let each of the museums decide how to install, which is, I think, very uncommon for an artist. So I was wondering what prompted that decision, or how you came to that, because I think it's fascinating.
Thank you. Well, I wanted to be participatory. I wanted people to be confronted by those suitcases, like that story I told you, that this girl said, oops, they're twins, that kind of thing. Let's see, where am I going to go with that? I never thought of it as art. I thought of it as a teaching tool. And so, and this thing has a life of its own now, which has been really interesting. So it started sort of innocently by making those suitcases, and I thought, well, where can they be shown in Montana? So I know the art scene pretty well because we've been here for 40 years. And so I went to art gallery directors and asked if they were interested. And so I traveled for a couple of years, I'd say. And then I thought, yeah, why not invite for volunteers to put it together. And as I said, every installation has been different. And I think that just like the little notes that kids wrote and drew at the library here this last month, by participating, you take something away, of course. And I think that was the idea. And I was pretty, after I traveled to Montana and then going to Holland and now becoming kids. I asked the last time I was there, I said, well, where do the kids come from? Oh, they come from all over the country, And they have this curator, this education curator, takes a group and spends a couple hours with them in that room, and they each get to investigate a separate kind of victim and do homework on that. So it's as I said, it has a life of its own, which is very satisfying to me as an artist. So I'm still, as I said, in the process of trying to give away the other sculptures, and so, but that process, it's like similar to my wife and I had a huge collection of American folk art, and we started to think about where's this going to go. You know, I mean, I'll be 87 in a few months, and it's time to start thinking about those kinds of things. And so we went to curators and museums all over the country, ended up with a curator at the Smithsonian saying, go to there's a Kohler Foundation in Sheboygan, Sheboygan, Wisconsin, who specializes in collecting folk and outsider art. And they took almost 400 pieces from our collection. And then the others went to the Missoula Art Museum and to the Hallie Fort Museum in Salem, Oregon. Is a great museum. So I was trying to do the same thing with the with this collection. Is like so I'm reaching out to people who know, especially the Holocaust kind of exhibition kind of world, and so now we're suddenly in touch with curators and museum directors in other parts of the country, and that's an interesting process to do that. And I even wrote an article. The National Folk Art Society, where I was a board member, asked me to write an article about how we dealt with our collection, because the editor, who is in her 90s now, said a lot of our members are elderly. They don't know how to go about this, you know. So that's been another part of the teaching part of it, you know. So, yeah, how to find good homes for your collection.
Have you reached out to any of the museums or galleries in Israel?
I have not. I don't have, yeah, good question. Do you have contacts with museums in Israel or not? Do you?
I might be able to start a link.
Okay. Let's talk in a minute. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Good question.
Yeah, I was very taken by your sculpture of the wooden shoes. It reminded me of an exhibit I think I saw at the Holocaust Museum in D.C. of just thousands and thousands of discarded shoes. And I was wondering if you were thinking of using that, you know, in a similar way as the suitcases. It's very poignant.
Yeah, I'm also quite taken by those photographs of all those piles of shoes, etc. And so, being Dutch, this wooden shoe seemed like a good kind of fit. While I think of it, at one point when I was back in Europe as a young man, we still had a draft in those days, and I volunteered for a draft in Holland. And they sent me to Germany as a young officer. I was a young lieutenant. I was probably 20, 21, something like that. But I was in Celle, which is near Hanover and near Bergen-Belsen. So I actually got to visit Bergen-Belsen. And another thing that comes to mind about Bergen-Belsen, a childhood friend at the Montessori school, Pim de Vries, I learned only recently he had survived Bergen-Belsen. They never talked about that. That whole family survived Bergen-Belsen. And there's videos online. But that's another kind of little story that pops into my mind. And I'm not sure what else I'm going to do in that series. You know, at the moment I'm working one on Gaza. And I'm painting rubble, and I'm trying to figure out how to paint rubble. And so, yeah.
I want to share, I think it was only 2 months ago or so that you came to visit for the first time. And we stepped together into this space, which some of you know, the synagogue just underwent renovations. And so I wanted to show you what this looks now. So we could decide how to set up this evening, how to bring the bread into the Seder, and all these kinds of things. And we said down in my office, and it was a really remarkable couple of hours to me. They were two Europeans sitting with all this history, and a lot of things were in the space that remained unsaid. And while looking at your pictures and the different kind of installations, I realized there's something distinctly European about sitting in the presence of objects that have seen way too many things. And so often we sit in the presence of these objects and we have nothing to say. And sometimes silence actually seems to be the most adequate of all answers. But tonight, I think, was an example of how to create objects and how to find words that are memorable and respectful and leave enough space, enough empty spots for the things that remain unspoken. So
Thank you. Yeah.
I want to thank you. I think, let's give another applause. It is a little odd. Thank you. We would love to have you back when you figured out how to paint rubble.
Thank you. I have sleepless nights trying to figure that one out. So I've got two, from all those photographs you see online, I've got two building structures that are just, blown to bits, sort of, So I got those painted, and then I thought, oh yeah, there's all that rubble in the foreground, and do you do it with, a million little paint strokes, or do you generalize about that? So it's an interesting problem.
Thank you. I also want to thank, last but not least, our Cody, who made his own little installation here tonight. And I don't know if many of you noticed, but this is a normal screen. But it sits on an edition of the Talmud that I found when I came here. So it is very much more part of Beth Shalom than my own edition. And it sits on 3 original synagogue chairs that were brought here from Maine, from a very first generation American Jewish synagogue in Maine that does not exist anymore, but whose remains we have here to cherish. So thank you for your creativity, Cody, and for your technical expertise to make this evening happen. Willem and Diane, we have a little bouquet of flowers that is for you, and there used to be an envelope sitting here that disappeared.
Cody gave it to me
wonderful.
already.
Okay,
I'm
great.
sorry, yeah.
Good.
But
So
thank
this
you.
is for you. And thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much.
I would love to invite you all, if you're able, to rise. We begin this evening with Psalm 23 set to violin music. I would love to end this evening in memory of those 6 million, some of whom we got to be with tonight. Please rise if you're able. Adonai Eloi lo echsa bino desheyabitzeni el mei menuchot el mei menuchot yenach aleini ach tov chesed yirdefu Adonai Roi, Lo Echsa. Thank you for being with us here tonight, for learning, for sharing, for remembering.